Hi, my name is Marilee Pennings, and I'm going to be taking you step by step on the instructions for making a protective face mask for the Orange City area health system. The health system is anticipating a shortage of face masks, so this is something that we can do to help them out. This face mask has two sides. There's the outer layer and the inside layer. It does have a pocket in it, which the health system will be inserting a filter to add protection to it, and then also has some elastic on each end to hold it to the head of the wearer. The face mask, it's important to remember that we use 100% quilter's cotton or 100% cotton for the outer layer, and then also an 100% cotton, maybe a t-shirt type fabric or a lightweight cotton fabric. It needs to be 100% cotton for the breathability, and so that's an important thing to remember. When you are finished with these face masks, I will just give you that notation right now. You can group them together in a bag and drop them off at the hospital system. If you use the driveway across from the daycare and drive around to the back side of the hospital, there's a double set of doors facing east that you can enter. And in that lobby, right inside those doors, there will be a table where you can leave your donations there. So you can drop them off at the health system when you're ready to go. Now, a couple things to remember with these masks is we want to make sure that we pre-wash all the fabric prior to sewing. These masks will be washed and color bleached to be reused. So we want to make sure that all the shrinkage is out of them. So we'll pre-wash all the fabric prior to it. We would like to have the outer part of the face mask be a fun pattern of some sort. Make these fun to wear, for the people to wear. And then the inside layer to be a plain or possibly a small patterned fabric, so that it's easy to tell from the very beginning which side the wearer needs to put to the inside. On the website, you will find the pattern for making the face mask. There are two pieces to it. The little larger piece here is the outside of the face mask, and the smaller one is the inside of the face mask. You will need to cut two of each of these pieces to sew your mask together. And this is what the pattern will look like when you find it online as you print it out. After you have cut the two pieces of the face mask right sides together like this, the first thing you will want to do is to sew this curved seam right here. I have sewn this one together already to show you how this is using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're sewing that curved seam. Once it's sewed, clip it several times along that seam. That will make it more comfortable for the wearer to have a smoother curve on the inside of that mask. You will do the same thing with the inside layer of the mask. I'm using a 100% cotton t-shirt fabric here, but you will stitch that curved seam just like that and then clip it in several places so that the curve is more smooth on there. Once that is finished, you will want to go to the ends of the fabric, each end here, and turn those under to stitch. I have turned this under one time on the inside piece of the fabric and top stitch it. Because I have a knit fabric, I am turning it over just once. If I would have a woven fabric, to avoid a lot of fraying, I would probably just tuck it under a second time and stitch it so that the raveled edge is on the inside and we have as little fraying as possible. On the outer layer, I'm doing the same thing, just folding it over one time. This will be folded in again later in the process, so there's no need to tuck that ravel edge inside to avoid the ravels. So now I have a piece like this for my outer layer. I have a piece like this for the inner layer, and I'm going to take the two layers and match them together at that center seam at the top. How about if I take one seam allowance and lay it one way, the second seam allowance and put it the other way? That will eliminate a lot of the bulk at the seam allowance, so it's a little easier to sew. I'm going to match these two up now and stitch the two layers together. This top area here is where the nose piece will be. And the nose piece, we will insert a piece of pipe cleaner, a 4-inch pipe cleaner piece, into the nose area of that mask so it can be molded closely to the face. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on all of these seams and stitching the two layers together. And also, if you remember to back stitch on all of your seams, these masks will be washed and reused again. So it's important to make sure we have a durable mask. So we want to back stitch all of those seams so we do not have any seams coming loose. I'm just lining up the two layers now and stitching them together across the top. Again, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance to stitch the layers together. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom of the mask. I've got the top part stitched together now. On the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up the seams at the center. I'm going to turn one seam allowance to one side and the other seam allowance to the other side. Now if you notice, this top, the outside layer, is longer than the inside layer. That's piece A is longer than piece B, and it's supposed to be that way. So make sure that you have that extra piece at the end of piece A. And again, in the 1/4 inch seam allowance, I will stitch these seams together. Starting at the center seam and working outward, finding that it works just a little bit more easily to match up those center seams initially by working from the center outward. Whoops, just lost the thread in the needles. Okay, now I'm stitching the other half of that bottom layer. 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across the bottom. One thing I'd like to point out is that if you do need to use pins for cutting out your fabric or for holding the fabric together as you're sewing it, please try to keep the pins in the seam allowance only of the mask. We don't want to put extra holes in the face part of the mask to keep it as intact and as much as possible to keep the germs out. So let's keep the pins only in the seam allowance part of the mask. Now what I have is the two pieces sewn together like this. The ends are open that way. So at this point, what I'm going to do is take a 4-inch piece of pipe cleaner, or possibly if you have a lightweight wire, it might be used. Pipe cleaner really works good for this. So this 4-inch piece of pipe cleaner, going to take the very end of it, just the very tip, and turn it under and press it together well so that we don't have any sharp edges. We don't want those sharp edges poking out of the fabric over time as the mask is being worn. So I've got the edges just tucked under now and pushed together tightly. I'm going to find the center of the pipe cleaner by just folding it in half like this. And then I'm going to take that center and match it up with the top seam of the mask so that I have it centered over the seam allowance of the mask. Now, using a large zigzag stitch, I'm actually going to stitch that pipe cleaner directly onto the seam allowance of the mask. If I use a large zigzag, it's not going to bump into the wire at all. It will just go right over top of the pipe cleaner. So holding that in place, I'm going to take it and stitch it right over the top of the seam allowance. Again, I will make sure that I backstitch, and I'll be very careful that I don't hit the pipe cleaner wire with my needle. Again, with a large zigzag, I'm stitching right over top of the pipe cleaner. I'm stitching it to the seam allowance of the mask. I'm not going into the face part of the mask at all. I'm just doing it on the seam allowance. So this is what I have. This is the nose part of the mask, and that's actually what will be molded or fit against the face of the wearer. So it's important that we have that wire in there to help it fit more tightly. Okay, at this point I'm ready to turn the mask inside out. So using the ends, I will turn it inside out. And straighten it out as much as I can. Okay, this is what I have now. This will be the top of the mask. Here's where the wire is, so that can fit to the face of the person wearing the mask. And this, the bottom part, rolls under their chin to give them as much protection as possible. Now the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to straighten out these seams as much as possible and top stitch them, just to make sure everything is laying nice and flat. This layer isn't going to roll out or be uncomfortable for the wearer. So I'm going to top stitch this, and at the same time I'm going to take these ends of the mask, the longer piece, and just fold them under and top stitch them at the same time, so I have them tucked under when I'm ready to insert the elastic. So I will tuck it under, top stitch, and kind of straighten out the fabric as I go. I'm taking it and just rolling the fabric to find the seam, and then pulling it, straightening it out so that I can top stitch. Again, rolling the fabric so that it's at the seam, and then top stitching. I'm top stitching about between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the finished seam. Just roll that fabric between your fingers so that you can get all the way to the seam. And then I'm going to stitch all the way to the end, so I have the end of the mask piece, that top piece A, stitched under as well. Again, back stitching at all the seams to make sure that we have durability. Then I will do the same thing on the top of the mask. And here is where I have the wire at the top. So if you need to go a little bit further, maybe 1/4 of an inch or even a little bit more to get around that wire, you can. But starting at the end, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fold it under and then top stitch it. Working that fabric under so that the under layer is just tucked right underneath the top layer. Following the curve of the mask. Now here's the point where I'm getting close to the wire, so I'm going to go a little bit further to give me a bigger top stitching to get around that wire. Again, working the fabric to get it rolled over to the seam allowance and get that under layer rolled under just enough to hold it in place. Okay, so what I have now is a mask. I've got it top stitched so that everything holds together in place. I've got this pocket in here. What this health system will be doing is inserting a filter into this pocket to give some added protection for the wearers. So this pocket is important to make sure you keep it open. You as a seamstress will not need to do anything with that filter. That is something that the health system will be inserting before they use them. Next, we will be adding the elastic to the side of the mask so that it can be worn. On this one, I've used the hair ties. These large hair ties are really nice if you can get them. Really nice to be able to use for these masks, because then the people can just slide them right over top of their ears. But if you cannot get these hair ties or don't have any of these available, you can use a 6.5 inch piece of elastic. Now this is 1/4 inch elastic. 1/8 inch elastic would work okay also. But what you will need to do is have a 6.5 inch piece, one for each side of the mask. What I'm going to do then is lay the elastic piece right across the end of that, the piece A where it's longer. I'm going to lay the elastic across there and fold piece A to meet piece B. So I've got my elastic inside. Now I'm going to stitch the edge. It's actually making a casing for that elastic. I'm going to stitch that where it's right next to piece B on the inside of the mask. I'm putting my elastic in there first so that I don't have to insert it later. Just a little easier step for me to do. If you'd rather make the casing first and then insert your elastic, you may do it that way. I find it's easier to put the elastic in there first. And then what I'm going to do is take my elastic and just fold it over maybe 1/4 inch. And I'm going to stitch that. I'm going to bar tack it. I'm going to make sure that it's bar tacked really well because this piece will get a lot of use. So I want to make sure that this is put together well so that it can endure the use that it's going to get. I might just put a piece of pin or put a pin in here first to hold it together. Sometimes these elastic pieces are hard to get under the machine, but I will hold it together enough so I can get my needle started. And then I'm going to actually do a small zigzag with a very tight stitch so I can hold it together. I'll get it started, then I'll take the pin out so that it can hold together well. And again, I'm just going to really put a hard stitch in there so that it can hold together and take a lot of use. I might move over just a little bit to get some more of the elastic attached. That way I make sure that that elastic is attached well so that it's not going to come loose over time. And I think what I'll probably do is stitch across the elastic this way as well, just to give it some extra hold. Okay, and then what you can always do is just turn that elastic to get it inside the casing so that it looks a little nicer and it would be more comfortable for the people to wear also. I will do the same thing on the other side, adding that piece of elastic or adding that hair tie like I did before. If you're doing a hair tie, what you have to do is put the hair tie on the inside of that casing and then kind of hold it in place and work with it as you go. Because of the hair tie is a circular piece, you're not going to be able to lay it flat, of course, but you can tuck it to the inside of that casing and then stitch it and kind of play with it, straighten it out as you go to stitch that down. And that will give you your finished mask. Again, these are for the Orange City Area Health System, and this is something that they would really appreciate because they are anticipating a shortage on these masks. One thing I'd like to point out is that some of you may have elastic cord available instead of regular elastic. I happen to have elastic cord here, but I don't have a lot of the 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch elastic. So what I tried to do was took a 7-inch piece of elastic cord. I made it a little bit longer to give me some working room. So I'm taking a 7-inch piece of elastic here. And then what I'm doing is putting it into the seam allowance of the casing of the fabric here, stitching it into place like we do on the other ones. Then I'm taking that cord and I'm actually going to knot it at the ends here. I'll put a knot in here. And then what I can do, I've got one already done here, put a knot in like this. Then what I can do is stitch it into either before you knot it or after you knot it, stitch it into the casing part of the mask. And because of this knot, I don't want this over time to come loose. So after stitching it, what you may do is tuck that knot to the inside of that casing and then stitch on either side of the knot. Just bar tack it on either side of the knot. That will hold it in place and that will help to prevent that knot from coming loose. So here you are. Here's the pattern and the instructions for making the mask. If you have any questions regarding this, I would suggest that you call Michelle Voss. Her number is 441-6614, and she will be glad to help you or to direct you to someone who can answer a question for you. Again, these masks are for the Orange City Area Health System. This has been tested and approved by the health system, so they know that these are the kind that they would like. They will be inserting a filter into the cap. This is what the filter looks like, into the mask. And this filter will help to give them extra protection. This is not something that you need to do when you're sewing the mask. The people at the hospital will be putting these in for you. And when you have them finished, again, if you could drop them off at the Orange City Area Health System, use the driveway across from the Orange City Daycare and drive around to the east side of the back of the hospital. There's a big set of double doors on that east side that you can go in. Inside that door, there will be a table where your donations can be put. So please help us out and sew these masks, and let's have a fun time doing it. Thank you.